we decided that we needed to get together a group of experts from across the state, so we engaged university scientists from UGA, including Mandy, and several oceanographers from Skidaway Institute of Oceanography to reevaluate the budget that NOAA released. So how do I go to the next slide with this this format, whatever we have here? And click on what with the mouse? Click anywhere. Okay. So this is the report that the budget that Mandy just showed you. Again, it does not deal with the gases that went into the Gulf of Mexico, which we know are going to be of tremendous importance of dissolved oxygen dynamics, as Mandy has told us in previous press releases. So this is dealing just with the crude oil. So we reanalyzed these fractions that NOAA describes as oil existing in the Gulf of Mexico. The first thing that we did in our analysis was to disregard this 17% of the budget because that's oil that never got into the Gulf of Mexico. So if it never got into the Gulf of Mexico, we don't have to worry about it. So we confined our attention to only the oil that did get into the Gulf of Mexico. So instead of 4.9 million barrels getting into the ocean water, it was really only 4.1 million barrels. The next thing we did is we didn't question these various forms that the oil was in. We realized that there must be wide error bars, and our understanding of how much is in each of those pools is probably open to a good bit of consideration and debate. But it didn't really affect our budgeting to any extent, with the exception of this fraction that's described as dissolved or evaporated. Whoops, go back. So we did two things. We took those four forms of oil that are described out there, chemically degraded, chemically dispersed, naturally dispersed, dissolved, and the residual, and we subjected them to a degradation rate. And we asked our experts what are some reasonable degradation rates. We went back in the literature. We looked at some of the degradation rates from the Ixtoc spill in the Gulf of Mexico in 1979. And we thought that some reasonable rates for degradation over the time period that we're talking about were somewhere between 5% on a low rate to perhaps 10% on a high rate of degradation. And we degraded those four forms of oil that are out there at equal rates. The next thing we took is that 25% that was described as being dissolved and potentially evaporated, and we estimated what percentage of that oil that could be evaporated actually did evaporate. And we used two estimates here, 25% for a lower level estimate of evaporation and 40%. So of that 25%, we evaporated 25 to 40%. Now bear in mind, the only way this oil can evaporate is for it to get up to the surface. It has to be in contact with the atmosphere. But we know this oil was released at 1,800 meters, and a lot of that oil is trapped below the picnic line, between the very strong density gradient between the surface warm water and the deeper, very cold bottom water. So there's very limited exchange across that thermocline, that area of very rapid density change. And that's why you couldn't possibly have had 100% of that pool evaporating from the surface, because there is no contact with the surface. So using these two different estimates, a low rate of degradation and a low rate of evaporation, we came up with this estimate, and using high rates of evaporation and high rates of degradation, we came up with this estimate. So these are the only fractions that we can account for having disappeared from the Gulf. We have the two forms that were actually removed from the surface, either from burning or skimming, or the forms that could have been degraded or evaporated. And that leaves 70 to 79%. So the idea that 75% of the oil is gone and is of no further concern to the environment is just absolutely incorrect in the opinion of the scientists that we engaged in this analysis. Back to Mandy.
Of this oil budget, with all the issues that I just raised with the oil budget, there's an even bigger issue, and that is, what about the gas that came out of this wellhead? Up to a third of the hydrocarbon flux from this well is not considered at all in this oil budget, because about a third of the hydrocarbon flux from that well was hydrocarbon gases. So I would argue that, not only is there a lot of oil remaining in the system, but there's a tremendous amount of gas in the system. It's not being accounted for in the budgeting process, and we certainly don't understand the fate of the gas and the impacts of those gases in the system. We're going back out on Friday, and we're going to be following up on our work that we did in June and May, tracking the gas fields and mapping the gas fields, and we're also going to be doing a lot of work with sediment coring to document where the oil is on the bottom and to evaluate the impacts of that oil on benthic processes.